Hello and welcome to this week's news with Focus Israel. Tonight we will take a look at how Swedish taxpayers actually pay for history distortions. And we'll also take a look at the top meeting between Obama, Netanyahu and Abbas in America. But first, some short news from Scandinavia. It can be costly to openly support Israel's right to exist, that if you want to work in a governmental office. That is something that Mr. Lennart Eriksson outside Gothenburg found out as he actually ultimately lost his job over it at the migration board. This week, the Swedish newspapers Dagen and Världen idag, but they do report that the Ombudsman of Justice criticize the migration board's action. Also, what should be mentioned here is that if you want to support the Palestinian cause and blog and write about that, there will be no reprimand. Voices are now being heard all over the world that EU urgently removes Hamas and other Palestinian organizations from their terror list. Representing Sweden is Jan Myrdal and a teacher by the name of Lennart Wilhelmsson. And Norway is covered by Nidal Hamad so far. Palestinian school children are being refused to be taught about the Holocaust. Hamas says that Israel is no better because they don't teach about the Nakba. Now, Nakba means catastrophe and is referred to in the Arabic world to the very existence and the independence of Israel in 1948. Swedish television reported on September 20 and the radio reported on September 4th about these two events, and they compared them. Amongst other things, you could heard in Cecilia Uddén's radio program this, I quote, "Why should we learn about Jewish history when they poison us daily?" End of quote. Paul Widén, he met with Itmar Marcus in Jerusalem this week. Mr. Marcus, he's the founder and the director of the Palestinian Media Watch. And since 1996, he has been covering the Palestinian media and their hate propaganda against Israel and the Jewish people. And this is what he had to say about that.
It's a gross distortion for Swedish television to compare Palestinian refusal to teach Holocaust education to anything about the War of Independence, what the Palestinians call the Nakba, on a couple of grounds. First of all, the Palestinian refusal to educate is an absolute refusal. And for example, if you look in the Palestinian school books, they'll teach you in great detail, they teach the children in great detail about World War II. In fact, the 12th grade school book on history of the last century actually talks about the Nuremberg war trials, and it talks about Nazi racism, but it refuses to mention that Jews were the object of the racism, and it refuses to mention why the Nuremberg trials were held, what the Nazis were being put on trial for. So what you have here is an attempt to literally erase the Jewish side or the Jewish aspect of World War II, which was a very significant aspect, not just for Jews, but for the Nazis in terms of their motivation, and it's just erased from the historical story. Regarding the Palestinian suffering as a result of the war that their leaders started and the War of Independence, Israeli school books teach the War of Independence in great detail. Not only that, they also, in many of the school books, teach the Palestinian perspective on this, and they talk about the refugees. So what you're not having Israel refusal to teach about it. You're not having Israel denying that refugees were created as a result of the war. You're having it taught, and in fact, in the Arabic language schools, it's being taught from the Arab perspective. What Israel doesn't want to fund is the categorization of the creation of the State of Israel as a catastrophe, and for Israeli money to teach the characterization of Israel's creation as a catastrophe is essentially the denial of Israel's right to exist. It has nothing to do with suffering. Israel is acknowledging that Palestinians became refugees as a result of this war. But it has, and that's not the issue. The issue is Israel have a right to exist? And by calling Israel's creation a catastrophe, and by teaching Israeli Arab children to see that you're creating a sense of wanting to deny Israel's right to exist and work for its destruction amongst the Israeli Arab population.
What needs to be said here is that Western democracy, such as Sweden, actually funds this propaganda with tax money, since they give financial support to the school books. And this is what Itmar Marcus has to say about that.
Because Sweden funds the Palestinian Authority general budget, they're also funding the Palestinian school books. They're also funding Palestinian television, which is filled with hatred and demonization. And so any country who gives an open check to the Palestinian Authority is directly responsible for the hatred, and essentially is directly responsible for the next war that we're going to have with the Palestinian children when they grow up and be adults.
And that was all from me today. And now, Paul, over to you in Jerusalem.
The news in Israel this past week was dominated by the Tripart meeting between Barack Obama, Benjamin Netanyahu and Mahmoud Abbas. This meeting, however, was criticized for failing to reach a conclusion of when the peace negotiations between Israel and the Palestinians will resume. So it's still unclear when this will happen, but some commentators now believe that the conflict between Israel and the Palestinians soon will be completely overshadowed by the nuclear threat from Iran. In his speech to the UN General Assembly, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu sharply criticized the UN delegates who failed to protest when the Iranian president Ahmadinejad was allowed to spread his anti-Semitic conspiracy theories in front of the civilized world. "Don't you have any shame?" was one of the things he said. So that was last week. This week, this past Monday, was Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement, the holiest day of the year in the Jewish calendar. For 25 hours from sunset to sunset, many people fasted and asked for forgiveness for their sins. Right after Yom Kippur, preparations then started for the next biblical holiday, the holiday of Sukkot, the Feast of Tabernacles. This holiday starts on Friday night, and for a week, many people will move into their tabernacles, which they are now building outside of their houses or on their balconies. We end this broadcast of Focus Israel with images from different parts of Jerusalem where the preparations are now being made. My name is Paul Whedon. That's all for Focus Israel for this time. See us again next week.